Why is it said, nice guys finish last? And why in dating circles do coaches often say they see clients who complain, how come I can't get dates? I'm such a nice guy. And we've all heard the word naive, and you have to wonder, naive about what? I believe to be naive can come in a variety of forms, each of which is a denial. And I believe what we're talking about then when someone says so-and-so is too nice for his own good, or they got caught with their pants down, so to speak, or they didn't see it coming, is often a matter of a denial of the human nature of some people, but not all people. Now, there's a man, Robert Greene, who has written, for instance, the 48 Laws of Power, and he refers to character as being very important to ascertain, and he talks about how we all have a dark side. But what if this so-called dark side is only basically in some people and not others? In other words, more like than the psychologist Dr. George Simon Jr. writing, for instance, in one of his books, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, that not all people are wolves in sheep's clothing, or wolves in general. Of course, for those who are inclined in the biblical sense in Christianity, there being the urging to winnow people from the good versus the evil, although I prefer not to use the word evil. Also, there's a psychologist I know who has stated that the only difference between himself and all of his clients is that all of his clients are naive. Now, this topic also, the character of man, has been addressed from a variety of viewpoints. For instance, Erich Fromm, who wrote, amongst other books, The Art of Loving, also wrote a book, The Heart of Man. And Freud also tried to delve into why we are such supposedly warlike animals. Well, the question is then, is that all of us or some of us? And isn't that then the question at hand here, to be naive or not? Are all people basically the same, or are some quite different than others? And if all are the same, are they basically pretty much all good, loving people with a few bad apples? Or is quote-unquote everybody bad, as per the Bible's declaring that we are all sinners and fall short of the glory of God, and under certain circumstances deserve to burn in flames forever and ever? So, these days especially, to be, quote, naive as to the intentions of some people, or all people, some argue, can be rather downgrading to our lives, our longevity, our finances, our physical health, our relationships. How do we size people up? And of course then, how do you size people up without being accused of being judgmental? How do you assess without being condemning in the moral or insulting sense? For if one can size up a person well, I don't think they would be called naive. They would be called the opposite. He's nobody's fool. Now, case in point, a few examples. From the movie The Maid, there was an individual there who some would say was a, quote, do-gooder, a kind person, but she could not see how she was being maligned and taken advantage of by some, not all, people. Others in a more ill-hearted manner in terms of speech, George Carlin having said, they don't care about you. In fact, they don't give a blankety blank about you. Well, he was referring to some people, not other people. Can that be spotted or not? If that can't be spotted, I think the word naive in this sense then is used. although I think naive in general indicates denying of something, and to deny the core nature of some people, their core motives, is only one form of, quote, naivety. I'll just leave it at that. There are various forms of denial, I believe, but to deny the human nature, the orientation of some people and not others, is, I think, what we tend to refer to as being naive, not these other denial factors. I'll give then also, for those who've been on planet Earth a few years more than others, they've watched perhaps or heard the show Columbo, featuring Peter Falk. He was on that, 7, 8, 9 seasons, well-loved, I believe of Italian descent. And interestingly, at first on every show, Columbo is taken for a, quote, fool, a naive person in the sense I've been talking of, a bumbling oaf, so to speak. And the raincoat there, the car. Even on YouTube, there's a 10-minute or so video jokingly saying that this is his good car. Well, that might have been all staged. You could say he was using a ploy of sorts, almost like undercover, to make it look as if he were a fool or so-called naive person about human character, so that he could work, so to speak, undercover and gather evidence. But interestingly, if you watch the show, I've watched a lot of them, own a lot of the episodes, I think you could conclude, that Columbo, after a certain point in time, will start to give what I might call zingers to the person he is collecting evidence on, pursuing, so to speak. And he will drop little comments, little words, little looks that say, I'm kind of onto you, or this doesn't add up, or something smells fishy here. In other words, he will signal to the other person that something doesn't add up here, and I'm not a fool. I'm not as naive by any way, shape, or form as you thought concerning what your core operating principles are here. And thus it amps up more and more, but done all the time respectfully, until at the very end I like to joke with some people that the person he has been pursuing, so to speak, all along is so tired of his life and is so tired of being pursued and feeling guilty that he almost literally sticks his hands out and says, please put the handcuffs on me. I'm tired of all this. And yes, let's go to the coffee shop and have a coffee and donut and joke about it all before you take me to headquarters and I go to the clink. Done respectfully. But my point is, Columbo was taken as a naive person, a person unaware totally of the operating principles of some people, but not all people. And I'll conclude with some misconceptions then, I think, that have held back a number of Christians concerning winnowing people, sorting people out, and unfortunately then all too often being naive. The Christians are admonished, for instance, don't judge lest you be judged. And yet, does that mean a person should not assess people? Or is judgment meaning don't assess people in a disrespectful manner in terms of the words you're using either inside of your head for personal use or what you utter? And secondly, biblical scriptures have said all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And yet, E.W. Tozier, a Christian man of some repute, 50, 70 years ago, mentioned in one video, the spiritual man walks alone. Well, the spiritual man, of course, in the Bible, also the sinner. And he points out also, for instance, Noah, Esau, and a few others as being yes, men and sinners, and yet, shall we say, quite preferable to some others. Noting, for instance, that Adolf Hitler, some could argue, was a Christian also, and urged that certain Bible verses be preached throughout the Germanic kingdom during World War II, Nazi era. So we can all be quote-unquote flawed, but on quite a spectrum. I think then it's quite a mistake in how we're going to live our lives, and we can end up quote-unquote quite naive if we're going to say, well, we are all the same. We are all perfect, or we are all this idea of a flawed and horrible worm of a sinner. When in fact you might say, if we are sinners or we are all flawed people, well, some are very flawed and some have a minor number of flaws, comparatively speaking. I'm talking then on a continuum here. And if we can't see that, then I think we can be called naive. There are, on the opposite end again, some on YouTube and more who say we are all basically loving, kind people except for a few bad apples. So I think both focus on one end of a spectrum instead of seeing that people can often fall on two ends almost. And my final view then is a person basically speaking uplifting, or do they have a core in them to be emotionally destructive toward almost anybody except their allies? That, psychoanalytically speaking, for the purposes often of displacement. But that's my viewpoint then on this concept of naivety and what we mean by naive. Sorting people out. And yes, in this day and age, if we cannot sort people out as to their truest intentions, and what does that mean in my book? It means, is the person basically wanting to uplift all of humanity or only their allies? And otherwise they have a malicious undercurrent there, going back basically to their childhood almost inevitably. And that's my skinny then on that.